Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Today we will proceed with the theory of learning or consumer learning, and we have already been doing some work which was undertaken in the last class. But before I continue with it, let me remind you again, why is it important to understand the consumer learning process? Remember, what consumers are interested in is their response is what is required by a marketer. So the marketers would like to get a consumer to respond to their product in a very favorable manner. Now, to do that, we need to understand how does a consumer learn to behave in a particular manner. And for that, learning process becomes important for marketers to understand. We have been talking about perceptions, and we have been talking about how these perceptions come about. But now we are coming into the process of responding or response by the consumers based on certain stimuli. We had discussed the stimulus situation when we were talking about cues and stimulus during the perceptual lectures. But now we are basically into response system. Consumer behavior or learning processes have to be understood under two conditions. One of that we were discussing in the last session is what we say instinctive response or reflexive response. That is what Pavlov tried to explain through experiment with dogs. And he tried to prove that once a conditional response or conditional stimulus is associated with an unconditional stimulus, then with the help of the conditional stimulus, you will be able to get the response that is associated with the unconditional. Now, just to remind you, we go back and look at the same chart that we had seen at the last stage, where we saw that the unconditional response is, for example, the taste of meat on the tongue of a dog. And the conditional stimulus that we were looking for is the bell. So the unconditional stimulus, which was the meat, when combined with the conditional stimulus of the bell, we take away the unconditional stimulus. So automatically the conditional stimulus was eliciting the same response that was associated with the unconditional. Now, just to put it back again into the framework, you have to review the chart and you will understand that what Pavlov did, he first put the taste or the paste of the meat on the tongue of the dog and then rang the bell. The response was that the dog was salivinating, which means he was dripping saliva. Now, therefore, you must understand the logic and linkage between the unconditional and the conditional stimulus. One thing is very important, that the unconditional stimulus must come after the conditional stimulus, which means once you ring the bell and you put the paste on the tongue of the dog and keep doing it, which means there has to be a logical repetition in it. And at that point, when you take away the second part, which is the unconditional, the conditional will automatically create the response that you are interested in. Now, therefore, these 4 points are logically linked in the Pavlovian theory of instinctive of reflexive response. Number one, that there has to be a sequence, and the sequence is that the conditional must come first and the unconditional must come second. Second, the pairing, it must be together. There has to be two things happening at the same time. The third is that as you move along, you come to the point where we must have the response that is supposed to be biological. So there is a link between biological response systems and the conditional framework. And it has to be repeated a number of times. So when we look at the Pavlovian framework, it suggests that the response is instinctive, reflexive. Another example could be that when I show a child a red plate, and then I put his hand on a hot surface, And then later on, after repetitive things, you only show the red plate, the child will know that this is something which is hot. So you can create these concepts of reflexive response system through this framework. Now, having said this, there is a new theory which is moved in with the Pavlovian frame, and we call it the NEO. The NEO is N-E-O, which means this is the new theory using the Pavlovian concept of using conditional and unconditional stimulus to get a conditioned response. And in that, what they suggest is that this process is not reflexive, which means ये खुद ब खुद नहीं हो जाता. It is not instinctive या as a reaction नहीं है. इसके पीछे there is a logic of association. So what this new thought is into position is cognitive association. Now, cognitive means a thinking process. So what happens is that when the unconditional response and the conditional response, they are brought together, the consumer starts a thinking process which in his thoughts links the two together and also links the third, the response, with these three. So there is a thread going through all the three things, and it is not something which happens just after the blue. It happens because the consumer uses a logical thinking process, a rational thinking process. He creates associations, and once he has created these associations, he has a better picture of the whole system, and then his response comes out of that. So there is a kind of a learning which is taking place when they are linking all these three things together. And then what therefore we are saying is that in the Pavlovian theory, that was basically from the point of view of reflection, reflexiveness, and we had also given an example in terms of कि अगर news सुन रहे हैं and then खुशबू आती है खाने की, तो therefore there is an association created, and that again, like I said, the unconditional response must come after the conditional response. लेकिन उसमें एक चीज जो which is important to be remembered is that the conditional response that you are looking for, or the conditional stimulus that you are trying to put on, should be a novel thing. Novel means उसमें कोई जिद्दत होनी चाहिए. There should be something new in it, and that is how the relationship will become stronger. On the other side, when we talk about the neo-Pavlovian theory, we are saying that the human beings actually seek knowledge. They try and learn things through association, and this association is both logical और उसमें कोई relationship है. जब ये relationship and logic is combined together, the person will learn, and this learning is much more stronger than what is suggested from the Pavlovian framework, where it's only a relationship between two things, and over a period of time it can fade away. Now, having explained the concept of neo-Pavlovian theory, we need to also remember what are the implications of this learning process. Now, एक चीज तो very clear, because we have said that unless and until there is repetition, the learning will not be strong. There will be problem coming in there. So repetition has to be made, and that is why you will see ads are repeated over a period of time. Now, this repetition is what really tries to bring these two things together. And therefore, if you repeat a thing again and again, it is suggested that the learning process will be stronger, because there will be slowly an association is going to be developed. But the association that needs to be developed is a logical and has some relationship to the individual's own desires. And we talked about, let's say, there was this concept of the quality of a product and or a brand, and then within the brand, we now extend the brand by adding a new product under the brand umbrella. When we do that, there has to be an association. Number one, the association is that the original brand has quality, therefore perceptually a person's response is, or conditioned response is already there. Now we will bring a new product under it. The conditioned response regarding that product which has been brought under the brand will be similar, that this product has same quality. But this quality has to be maintained repeatedly. Otherwise, there will be a gap and immediately the impact would totally be lost. So even in advertisings, we see that there has to be repetitions which will take place. The question which comes out of all this is, how many repetitions should be enough? If you keep repeating something, there will be what we call overload and boredom. And when boredom comes in, people start getting bored. The logic of this impact of repetition on learning and memory will fade away. Two things that we need to consider. Number one, how many repetitions to establish the relationship and the connection? Because it is also understood that at a point of time, when the maximum has been reached, then any addition can have two possibilities. One, those additions are totally wasted effort. Then the cost in adding to it will be of no use. So we have what we call marginal utility of the same ad coming through, because as we keep going on, the impact on the learning process is continuously minimized. So all that cost of extra ads or extra efforts made will be of no use to anybody. Second is that it also can happen that when you repeat a thing over a limit, people can start getting into a negative frame and they start rejecting the whole concept of learning and take it into a different frame altogether. Rather than learning the positive, it has a negative impact and the speed of forgetting becomes quite extensive. Now, in theory, research suggests that 3 repetitions, if seen by consumer, should be enough to create that. How does it happen? The first visibility of an ad would create awareness. Second would create association. Third would create learning. This 3 frame is also known as 3 shot theory, which basically reflects that the first creates awareness, the second relationship, and the third is kind of reminder. And that is why, if you have studied in your earlier course, that reminder ads are given. And the reason for that is that once you have become aware and you have created a relationship, over a period of time, you should be reminded of that. And the reason there is that there should be no memory loss. To reduce this memory loss, we then keep reminder ads moving in so that the person keeps remembering what we were talking about. But this is one theory which suggests that 3 minimum exposures are required to create this learning. But there are other research which suggests to create these 3, you have to at least give 10 to 11 exposures. And then it is suggested that out of these 10 or 11 exposures, an individual customer will be hit by these 3 points. That is, the first one to create awareness, the second one to relationship, and the third one as a reminder. Now, like I was saying, the idea is to reduce the memory loss in a consumer. And we've already emphasized that going beyond a certain point also can create boredom, which will reduce learning immediately, or the cost will become a lost issue. The other aspect is that once you see the same ad, it becomes boring anyway. What is the implication of that? The implication is that you can change the ad in different forms. There are 2 types of forms. One is when we do some cosmetic change, which basically means the original theme, the original words, they all stay the same. But what you can change, or the marketers can change, is either the background or the environment, or even the models are changed, but the wordings and the statements stay the same. These are basically cosmetic changes, but it tends to help in reducing boredom and keep the knowledge in position. The second aspect of this framework is to bring major changes in the ad. Now, major changes in the ad could be that in one ad, one single attribute is prominently displayed, and then we go to the other ad, which obviously the overall theme, the overall framework stays the same, but another attribute, another aspect is presented. It is suggested in research again that these two things, among the two things, the second one is more effective in creating these relationships or these associations, and therefore enhances the memory regarding the brand or the product that we are marketing. Therefore, when we are talking about these two aspects where we either change the advertisement on cosmetics or in its true frame or make it more variant, then as I suggested, research says that that second one will have more stronger associations created with the product and between the ad and the product itself. Now, one thing that we have been discussing in the previous sections when we were talking about perceptions and stimulus coming in and how people tend to ward off or stop a lot of information flow, this also has an impact in the case of repetition and learning processes. When there is a lot of competition and there is a lot of advertising going on, this repetition frame has to be increased, because with a lot of information flow, the learning is reduced and memory loss occurs faster. So it is that point when we see more and more repetitive ads coming in, when there is a lot of competition going on among a number of companies and each one is trying to send in more messages. So repetition of messages becomes more in terms of the numbers coming through. इसीलिए though the research is very categorical कि 3 हो जाएं exposures तो learning होती है, but we also know that when competition is there, तो ये फिर 3 भी ठीक नहीं है, then you need to have more of them and more impacts must come through. लेकिन उसमें बात वही है कि is there something unique that is being portrayed in the ad which will have an impact on the consumer learning, and इसीलिए the second aspect where the variations are created in the ad which are not cosmetic have more impact on the learning process. Now, after this discussion, let's look at another concept which is very important from the marketing point of view, and we call this stimulus generalization. What happened was that Pavlov realized that if the bell was rung and the dogs were into conditioned response method of salivinating, then sometimes if keys, चाबियां, अगर उनको आप हिलाएं, तो the sound which is very similar to a bell will still have an impact on the dogs and they would also start salivinating. Therefore, his thought was that अगर कोई एक stimulus जो original stimulus से मिलता जुलता हो, तो उसका impact भी आएगा. अब इसका जो issue है, उसका impact क्या हो गया, उसकी implications क्या हो गई, that there are a number of products that you can see in the market, what we call them Me Too products. अब Me Too products का मतलब यह है कि there are certain products which are the original ones, which have a very strong brand impact on the consumers. They are considered to be of a very high grade and people are loyal to it. So what other marketers tend to do is that they try and capture or follow or copy a certain aspect of the strong brand so that sometimes people will confuse the two. And what can happen is that because of this confusion, people will tend to buy a lower priced, similar looking product than the original product, which obviously will be of a higher price, because जो original था उसको market करने में lot of money was spent. So this second Me Too product, when it moves into the market, keeping certain factors similar, for example, the package की shape या bottle की shape, colors, if they are more or less similar to the original product or brand, people in their hurry tend to confuse the two and buy the product which is a similar product or a Me Too product. इसी तरह से we see a number of counterfeiting things happening, and there is a major issue coming in where real copies are made of the original product and people cannot differentiate because there is a sense only the name will work or a certain feature that is used will have an impact, and that creates losses to original companies, original brand producers, which is substantial. Particularly if you go to Hong Kong, you will find a number of products which are already there, like Gucci bags are there, which are imitations. They are not the original product, but people tend to buy it because when they are brought to their homes, many people cannot differentiate actual brand or quality. So these Me Too products or counterfeiting or what we call imitation products are substantially in the markets, particularly in the less developed economies, and not only in the less developed economies, they are also available to the unwary, which means कि जो आदमी ना जानता हो कि ये counterfeit है तो वो भी खरीद लेते हैं in the developed economies. So this has had a major impact on the marketing, and which comes out of the concept of product or stimulus generalization. Now, इसी के opposite, when companies tend to establish themselves as differentiated product or a differentiated brand, so what do is that they try and create a stimulus which is differentiated. Now, this is the opposite of the generalization. So from the Pavlovian theory, we have been able to understand that certain stimuluses can be related or generalized, but to break out of this strong, negative force, we need to have stimulus discrimination. And this is what was our topic in the past also, where we tried to suggest that perceptions can only be built on very strong grounds if there is identifiable or a very strong differentiating feature in the original brand. Given this, let me suggest to you that there are certain very strong brands who are now trying to take some technical steps. They're using some high technology to make sure that their brands can be recognized as totally separate brands. Now, basically, what we are talking about was how this generalization of the stimulus has negative impacts. But from the positive point of view, we need to know how marketers can use this generalization frame to develop their own marketing campaigns and their own product development system. Product line extension, for example. Product line extension is a very important concept in strategically launching products towards various segments. Within that, for example, there is, let's take the example of washing systems. Now, we could have hand wash powder, that means कपड़े धोने का पाउडर अगर हम लें तो जो हाथ से कपड़े धोए जाते हैं, we call them washing powders, but hand wash के लिए. उसी की second category or line extension could be the machine wash. Now, the brand is the same or the product is the same, packaging more or less is the same. We have just added a new frame and we launch a product line extension which will have the same generalization impact कि अगर hand wash का जो powder है is of good quality, automatically generalization will take place and the machine wash powder would also be considered of the same quality. इसमें जो important चीज है कि quality होनी चाहिए, otherwise this system will break down. Now, the second concept is product form extension. That was product line extension. Now, this is product form extension. Product form क्या है? उसकी shape change कर जाती. The original job that is being done is the same. For example, let's take the example of oral cleaning, that is mouth cleaning. We have, let's say, a toothpaste. Now, another form extension can be tooth powder, which we normally see we can use. The third extension can be the mouthwash. That's a liquid thing that you just gargle with and spit it out. So that is another form. You will also find strips, which means you just put the chewing gum or whatever in your mouth and it will also clean the same, it will do the same thing like a toothpaste will. So here we find that the same product generalization has taken place same brand is now launching different forms using the same concept of generalization. And in this case, the generalization frame is that the brand is recognized in the first instant for a toothpaste. For example, let's say it's Crest or Colgate. And then with that, it can launch a number of forms. The third is product category launch. Category means a totally different use for the product will be put into position. Therefore, a product is launched first, let's say, as a deodorant. Then we might go to a cologne. Third, we might go for a shaving gel. Fifth, we might go to an aftershave. And all these are for different product categories, and they target totally different requirements in the market. So keeping the logic of product generalization in mind, we can see that there is a lot of things that are done. We can have product line extension, we can have product form extension, and then product category extension. Now, having said this, we need to also understand the relationship between these generalization frame and the concept of brand management. Now, in the brand management, we have normally two types of branding strategies. In the first instance, we have what we call the family branding strategy, which is the house branding. And the second is the branded family, which means a number of brands are put together within a family of brands, which is a little different concept than family branding, which means one single brand is used for all the products in that same category or in various categories that we have. So when we talk about family branding, we are actually talking about the same brand for all the products under that same umbrella. A good example is like Gillette. They have various products which are launched ranging from razors going to toiletries and so on and so forth. On the other side, we have house of brands where, like in case of P&G, you find a number of products with different brands for the same use. For example, shampoos. Now, within the shampoo systems, you can have Pantene, you can have Wash and Go, you can have Pert and Plus, you can even have Head and Shoulders. They're all brands which belong to P&G, but they are separate brands put under a house. Therefore, we have what do you call a house of brands. On the other side of the picture, we have a branded house where Gillette is the brand and a number of products are associated in it. But remember that when these concepts of generalizations or stimulus generalization is being looked at, we need to remember two or three things. To make this concept successful, there has to be a rational logic between one attribute throughout the system, throughout those frames. Agar wo nahi hoga, wo common thread, so there will be a disassociation, and then we will not be able to achieve the success of the concept of generalization. Now, one of the important thing is that these products must be complementary. If they are, they will be within the same situation. So any two products which are related must have a complementary framework. The second thing is that they should be transferable. The idea in the mind of the consumer can be transferred from one product to the other product. If it cannot be transferred, if there is no transferability of that perception, then we are afraid the logic of learning will not take place. In the same case, there is an image that is required. The image of one product can be logically understood and accepted by the consumer for another product. In this case, there has been some issues where a product which was associated, let's say, with let's say a fertilizer or a chemical, and we want to transfer the same brand to a food concept, creates a problem because there is no relationship. There is what you call a totally different conceptualization, different images, different quality or attribute framework. And that is why under those conditions, we find that two different brands are put into position. This is not to say that this is done every time, but most of the time when success is required, there has to be these 4 points that I'm going to put down to you on the screen. And let me repeat these. And these are, number one, that they must be complementary. They must have some kind of a substitution between the attributes. There must be some transferability. And then there must be a key image component which relates all of these together. This is specifically for umbrella branding, where one brand takes care of a number of products. That is why in the other situation, these fears that if one product or brand fails, or one product fails within the category, will affect all the other products in the same category or the same brand. It is taken care of when you have a number of brands under as a house, and each brand stands separated. Obviously, the two things have very important differentiation, and that is, in the case of a family, the cost is less. We have promoted one product or one brand, and then we launch another within the same brand capacity. The advertising requirement, creating awareness, is reduced. But when you launch within a number of products or under each one under a separate brand, the cost for each will go up. But the impact is that that concept becomes much more stronger, because the weakness of reflection of one weak brand on another is eliminated out of the system. And that makes it a more stronger framework. Having said this, what we have to look at, the second concept of what I call this implication of generalization, is licensing concept. We know that a number of products or brands are licensed out. Now, there are a number of companies which do that. Liz Claiborne is one. You can find even Ralph Lauren has another one. What they do is that they give their name to other products, which obviously is based on some kind of a fee. A good example is Walt Disney के जो cartoons हैं, they are normally licensed out, and other companies tend to use these the brands for their own product or own services or whatever they want to produce. So number of cartoons which have been very popularized by Walt Disney are sometimes used in products which are being launched from other platforms. Let's say Kenneth Cool is actually a shoe brand, and it's a very popular shoe brand among the men. And these people have licensed their brand for glasses. So a glass manufacturer which can contribute a similar quality image can use Kenneth Cool as their own brand name. Same is the case, like I said, of Liz Claiborne. And so there are so many other products which tend to use their brands and offer their brands for use with other things. Pierre Cardin is one where that same brand can be used on, is being used on watches, used on shoes, on ties, shirts, perfumes, and so on and so forth. This is a very strong concept which has been applied through the concept of stimulus generalization. And the idea is that once a product or brand has been recognized, its association with another product would have the same impact. But like I warned you, that it is very, very important to make sure that the logical extension of quality is maintained. If Pierre Cardin has a standard quality established in the mind of the consumer, then when the same brand is being used for a product, that product must reflect similar qualities. Otherwise, we will find some problems coming through in it. Okay, and obviously, it has to be also understood that there is a link of the products together. Like I gave you an example, it is very difficult कि अगर आप खाद की कंपनी का प्रोडक्ट ब्रांड है और उसी ब्रांड को अगर आप किसी फूड आइटम पे ले जाएं तो there will be a disturbance in the consumer's mind कि how is it possible that what is as khad would be reflected on a food. So there will be a problem coming through. The solution to this problem is therefore to have two different brands. And that is why we have these concept of family of branding or umbrella branding or house of brands, where a number of brands come together under a corporation, and we have a concept that is stronger in many ways. Now, having said this was discussing the generalization of a stimulus. We now look at the total opposite of that, and that is stimulus discrimination. Now, the impact of stimulus discrimination is the concept that we used some time back in terms of positioning. Now, positioning is a basic concept that is strategically important in the framework of segmentation, targeting, and positioning. And it was in the positioning concept that we wanted to suggest that every company wants to differentiate its own product in such a manner that consumers will be attracted to that particular product or brand of that firm. Now, this can only happen if the positioning point that you select is such that there is no scare of another closely related brand or product can be positioned next to you. And that is why we also discussed a repositioning concept when we said that if there is a brand which might come very close to your own brand in the perceptions of the consumers, then obviously there will be no differentiation between the two, and the consumer will find no significant reason for not moving on to a different product or brand than yours. It is for this reason that we need to really emphasize the concept that since stimulus discrimination does happen, but then how do we need to create that? And for that, we have already made a lot of discussions on the basis of how can that be done based on perceptions, perceptual maps, positioning maps created, a list of research that is taken through, and in that we find which are the important attributes that consumers look for, and based on those important aspects or attributes and looking at the company's capabilities, then we make a choice, and that choice of where we want to position our product is then reflected in our advertising campaigns and the way we go ahead and market our products and brands. Now, keeping these two major concepts in mind, one relates to the aspects of a generalization, and the second, which is targeted into the core aspects of marketing, and that is positioning, which really looks at from the point of view of stimulus discrimination. We have been talking about at times that how would discrimination take place is the only way when the consumer really believes in what is unique about the product or the brand from all the other competitive products or brands. And this has to be reflected in the advertising also, because it is through the advertising that we communicate our message to the market. So if the product might be different, might be unique, might have all the other aspects, but if we cannot take this concept to the consumer through very strongly discriminated or differentiated message, then the same thing will happen. There will be no really discriminating frame on which the consumer can bank on to come to a response system. Till now, we were talking about conditioning learning, but there is another concept which is gaining a lot of ground, and it has strong implications for marketing, and that reflects what we call instrumental learning. Instrumental in this case is what we might also suggest operant learning, which means that the person learns not as a simple conditioning frame, but learns through repeated trial and error. That means experience is brought into position. Instrumental learning has therefore been used to explain complex behaviors. As far as the previous one was concerned, that would explain simple behaviors like buying a product or whatever we have. But this instrumental learning process explains in detail complex behaviors. What the theorists who have developed this suggest that this only occurs over trial and error period. And what is happening is that the end of the response or learning process is the reward that a person gets from these trial and errors. Simple examples could be that we go to a number of shops. Now, at this point of time, we are taking a very important concept. There is no advertising, but we tend to go or look for buying a particular category of clothes or some product, and we visit a number of retail outlets. Going over these outlets, we first try one, we don't like it so much, we go to the next one, so on and so forth, till we reach a point that that product that we bought from that retail outlet, we like, and it is that reward that we remember. Now, subsequent purchases, we will tend to go straight to that same retail outlet. This is where instrumental or trial and error learning comes through. And like I said, the end product of this trial and error is something we call reward, and reward must be reinforced. So there is a logical combination between a trial and error reward system, and then we come to the concept of reinforcement of this method. Now, these concepts have been formulated and evaluated in a number of marketing research, but we need to remember again that trial and error का end जो है वो positive response systems हैं. हम देखेंगे कि what kind of responses are there, how did it come about. In this case also, the man or the person who actually carried out these research is named Skinner, and Skinner was the person who, similar to Pavlov, used animals to develop this methodology. Now, उसने learning process को elaborate कर दिया था. Learning process को elaborate करने के लिए what he tried to do was कि he used a number of animals to start to learn certain behaviors. For example, he is claimed to have taught pigeons, कबूतरों को ping pong, table tennis खिलाना भी उसने सिखा दिया था. The method he used was, and उसने काफी experiments किए हैं with mice. That means he has been able to get the mouse to do complicated tasks, and every time the mouse was going in the right direction, there was a reward, and if he would go into the wrong direction, there was a punishment kind of a thing. So what happened was that slowly the animal learned to go in the direction that the person wanted, and this repeated over and over again created the point of learning. We see it in our own systems. We see some animals who do a lot of acrobats. We know monkeys being trained to do that, elephants being trained to play football. We see even lions who have a specific behavior or reason. They are trained in complex processes through the concept of reward system. So the actual experiments which have led a number of other theories and research take place was basically targeted at mouse. That means a mouse was sent through a maze, and wherever he took the right turn, he would get some kind of a benefit, or if he went to the wrong, he might get an electric shock. So he would continuously move towards the direction in which the learning process was to be undertaken. And then the same process was repeated again and again, so that at a point of time, the mouse was released and he would follow exactly to the point without any assistance or help through this reward and punishment system. So we come to the conclusion in this frame that the learning process is the outcome of trial and error based on some reward systems. As would have become obvious to you now, that this instrumental learning process requires a kind of a award system, whatever. Now, to look at the award system, we need to understand that there are two types of some kind of an end product that is required so that the consumer will tend to learn to behave in a particular manner. Now, this could be negative or positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is very simple to understand, and that is it creates higher satisfactory levels. On the other side, the negative reinforcement should not be confused with punishment. Now, why am I telling you about these two distinctive points? Because punishment tries to discourage a behavior, whereas negative reinforcement tries to encourage a behavior. It does not stop you from behaving. It tries to encourage you towards that behavior. But it's a concept of reinforcement. So whether you have a negative reinforcement or a positive reinforcement, both tend to take you in towards the direction where you want to go. The punishment concept is that you want to discourage a behavior altogether. For example, let's say the ads which normally have fear component in it, insurance policy, for example. Sometimes insurance policies, sometime back, used to show somebody dying and leaving the family in distress. Now, this is negative reinforcement, but the idea is that you should go and buy insurance for yourself. Similarly, a negative reinforcement which was being used in trying to discourage cigarette smoking was to show a person in a bad health condition, TB, he's coughing, and then he's dying. Again, that was the concept of negative reinforcement, and the idea was to stop him from smoking. So this is something of a different nature. But now the ads have also changed, both for these 2 points. For example, insurance people now necessarily do not have to suggest death and distress, but can also show happiness when the policy is completed. There is benefit for the family as a whole. Children can go to the schools, or children can go, or the person who has got insurance policy created. Once the insurance policy matures, an old couple can then use that to go for a long trip outside or go for tourism, whatever. So the point is that reinforcement, both positive and negative, tends to push a person in a particular direction, whereas punishment stops the person from going into any particular concept. Now, having talked about these things, the final stage of this lecture would be to understand what we call extinction, which means forgetting. Now, obviously, learning and forgetting are two components of the same concept. We know that people tend to forget over time. So learning can slowly get reduced, forgetting can take place, what we call memory decay can start happening. Once that decay takes place, the person would normally tend to lose the things that he had remembered over a period of time. What does a marketer therefore do in this case? Like I told you a little back, that at these points, marketers tend to create repetitive advertisement or reminder advertisement so that they can have an impact repeatedly on the memory condition. The second, which is more stronger in trying to build this long-term learning process, is creating customer satisfaction over a period of time. So when customer is repeatedly satisfied over a period of time, it has a major impact on perceptions. A simple example in this case could be that universities normally have placement services. Now, placement services has a major impact on the image of a university and obviously the word of mouth which is carried by the existing students. Now, what can be done is 2 points we can see. One is the person or the company or the university places the student in a company, and that's it. Now, first time the placement takes place, the student or the person who has been placed has got a high value for the university, but over a period of time he forgets that the university did this for them, and therefore the word of mouth slowly reduces. On the other side, the same placement service can continuously stay in touch with the student from job to job and continuously ask about his doing, how good he is, how satisfied he is. Now, obviously, at this point of time, the placement is not doing anything, but they are ensuring that there is a strong memory build-up in terms of the university, and the output of that impact build-up is that the word of mouth will travel. The student will constantly remember the university through all the jobs, and as he goes along, he will talk about it. Now, this brings us to the end of the lecture, and I will continue with this topic in the next session, where we will try and discuss the strategic implications from the marketing point of view of how this instrumental learning can be used in terms of the advertising or the promotional campaigns that we have. Now, quickly, before we finish, we had started with the concept of new Pavlovian theory, where we suggested that it is not reflexive, but a thought-out process, an associative, logical, relationship-building process. Now, the next one that we discussed basically is what we talked about, the instrumental framework, where the learning is not just a connection of two response or stimulus and response, but rather it's a process of trial and error. At the end of the trial, we have reward, and rewards can be of the two types. It can be negative, positive reinforcements, which push an individual or a consumer to the desired outcome. With this, I come to the end of the lecture. So see you next time. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.